Alright, so in this video I'm going to introduce you to the general principles of natural law. And then from there, and over the course of many months and years, and making many videos, we're going to get more and more specific on understanding these general principles. But first and foremost, we have to start somewhere, and this video is where we're going to start by breaking these principles down and apart into their constituent parts so that we can understand each part separately and then bring them together as a whole and work with them as a whole from there. And so let's start here by introducing you to natural law, and then understand that I'm just going to give you some generalities about each principle, and then we're going to move on from there and get more specific in later videos. But before we begin, I just want to remind you that while we are separating out each principle into its constituent part, just understand that the universe can only function when all of the principles are working together at once and at all times. And we're just parsing to better understand each piece of the puzzle and how they fit into the big picture, and so that we can have a baseline understanding so that we can move on to more specific topics. And understand in this video, since it's going to be a long one and it's a challenging video to make, I'm going to be sticking to my notes because it's going to help me explain things better and allow the message to be more successful in offering you the understanding that you're going to need in order to understand the videos that are coming, that I'm going to be talking about in later videos. And so, next, I also want you to understand that I acknowledge that these principles break down at the level beyond the veil of conscious experience, beyond human conscious understanding. And what that means is that at quantum levels, cause and effect, which is a general principle of natural law, either doesn't exist or the causes and effects lie beyond our understanding. And further, if you're standing near a black hole, just like Newtonian physics, these principles break down as well. So, as long as you're existing here on Earth, not in the quantum, and not near a black hole, these principles tend to remain constant. And the only reason why I'm pointing that out is that these principles do work at the human level. They work here on Earth. They work in our reality, in our existence. And they will help, and your understanding of them will help you improve your condition here on Earth. And really, that's all that matters to me. And the point that I'm making here is that I want to leave the theoretical physics to the theoretical physicists and leave me the principles that actually work in our reality. And I want to know and to understand the ones that work best and give us the best opportunity for success in our lives right here and now. And so, first of all, that's all that I really care about. And that's the point of me bringing that up. Because, black holes are cool and interesting and stuff, but they don't exist in our reality. There isn't a black hole here on Earth. So, why worry about them? Let's worry about the things that are directly in front of us and move on from there. So, let's get into, let's just start this with a fun fact. I got a fun fact here, and this is just a fun fact about our universe that I wanted to start off with. And that is that our universe is analogous to a perfect accounting system. Because if you add together the total matter of the universe, you get a positive number. And if you add together the total energy of the universe, you get a negative number. And if you add the positive mass number to the negative energy number, you get 0. And my dad, who's a CPA, he just loves that little fact. And I just want to say that this isn't a principle or anything. It's just an interesting fact. And what it means is that everything is perfectly ordered and accounted for down to the very last electron in our universe. And thus, it actually takes no energy to create our universe, which is interesting. And I find this interesting because it shows us how you actually get something from nothing. You don't, because everything is no thing. Anyway, so fun facts out of the way. Let's move on to the general principles of natural law, which start with the principle of mentalism. The principle of mentalism states that the all is mind. The universe is mental. Thoughts lead to the manifestation of things and events. Thoughts create conditions. Conditions are rules. Conditions create our reality by creating the order out of the chaos of the unknown. This is pattern recognition, which begets us into the realm of consciousness itself. And once we're in the realm of consciousness itself, we're in human reality. We're in human existence. And so, thoughts create our state of existence and the quality of our existence or of our experience here on Earth. So, everything in creation is actually just a manifestation of the mind. For anything to exist, thoughts had to form first. Then they interact with the laws of nature to form what we perceive as physical reality afterwards. This is what we do as conscious beings interacting with the laws of nature. And this is based upon our knowledge base at the individual level. We actually drag the order out of the chaos of the unknown. And in other words, what you're actually not sensing or perceiving anything before it first goes through the mind. You don't actually see anything with your eyes. What is actually occurring is that when light hits your retina, which is in the back of your eye, special cells called photoreceptors turn the light into electrical signals. These electrical signals travel from the retina through the optic nerve all the way down to the back of the brain where the occipital lobe is located. In the occipital lobe, first it flips the image upside down because the image comes in upside down, so it flips it right side up. And then he turns the signals into the images that your mind interprets based upon what it experiences, and your knowledge base, which is based upon your perception and your belief structures. And this happens with all of our senses in one way or another. And the point is here is that what you're experiencing is not the outside anything. You don't experience the outside anything. You just experience images from the mind. And this is why the brain in the vat is this mental masturbation theory that really freaks people out because there's actually no way to prove or disprove that we're just a brain in a vat, just experiencing images that are being fed through some tube or something. Because we're in no position to see outside of this mental creation that is created from our interaction with consciousness. And so it's also why the movie The Matrix was so popular and it hit such a chord with so many people, because they really tapped into that idea. But this is, of course, about success. So, what does this have to do with success? In terms of success, this principle also states that your behavior, how you act in physical reality, is determined by how you think. We behave the way that we do because we have certain patterns of thought embedded in our mind, and these patterns of thought run like programs, which are driving our actions. And we call these types of non-reactionary actions habits. And they constitute around 90 to 95% of all of the actions and behaviors that we do in life. And so it states that if your behavior, if your habits, are not getting what you want out of life, then it follows that you need to change the way that you think, because thoughts are the driving force behind those habits, behind our behavior. In other words, if you want to change your reality, you have to change the way that you think, because the way that you think may not be conducive to the requirements necessary for getting the things that you say that you want out of life. And in most cases, it's actually doing the exact opposite. And understand, we're going to move on from here, but there's a whole lot more stuff that we can talk about the mind and about thought, and we're going to in later videos to a great degree. But we have to move on from here and talk about the principle of correspondence. And this principle states that that which is above is like that which is below. That which is below is like that which is above. The very large in totality, the macrocosm, and the very small individual units that comprise the whole, the microcosm, they're just mirror reflections of one another. And to just get an idea of what I'm talking about here, if you look at our solar system, it's like 99.9% of it is just the sun, And so the sun constitutes really the whole. And if you really zoom in to the individual units of the sun, all you get is just two atoms, really, hydrogen and helium. And those two things are creating the sun through nuclear fusion. But really, all that depends on what you're seeing. You're seeing the same thing, but if you look at it from a particular perspective, you see the individual units, and then if you zoom out, you see the whole, its totality, but those two things are one and the same. And so you can't, for another example, you can't separate the tree from the forest, because you're looking at a tree and then you zoom out far enough and you see a whole bunch of trees. It's the same thing. It just depends on what perspective you're looking at. And there's a video called The Powers of 10 which I've uploaded on my Watch and Learn channel that you can see. So that really does a really good job at expressing what I'm talking about through video and zooming in and then zooming out by the powers of 10. So, I also want to point out that this is just an example of the idea of as above, so below. But this principle forces us to really start to look at the universe differently than just atoms building upon each other, creating molecules and proteins and cells and then human-sized things and all of that stuff. We have to consider looking at the universe slightly differently, because what we do know about the universe is that the universe is holographic or fractal in nature. And so what constitutes the universe is better understood as data structures and information. And what this is the unknown and the known based upon the perspective of the individual. So you're the individual. What is unknown to you are random data structures that appear chaotic because you don't know them. And then there's the information that you do know, that you dragged out of the unknown and process those data structures, turn that data structure into information that you can utilize for your advantage. And from this perspective, we get a better idea of what the universe looks like outside of the three-dimensional perspective of the human senses. Because information, the universe's stuff, is independent of volume. Volume is the amount of space occupied by a three-dimensional object. We perceive space and time in 3 dimensions, but you cannot place information into volume, which is interesting. It shows us that there's something going on that's beyond our senses, beyond our 3-dimensional perception. And also understand that the amount of information that you can stick into a volume of space does not at all depend on the volume of the space itself. This means that you don't use volume, 3 dimensions, to store information. You use surface area to store information. The point of me pointing, well, I'll talk about that in a little bit. I just wanted to just continue to try to explain what I'm talking about here. So, information is only stored on surface area, and the amount of information is proportional to the surface area of the object and has nothing to do with volume. And so this is known as the holographic principle, and this was mathematically proven by the late great Stephen Hawking, and is actually one of the only real profound scientific discoveries in physics over the last 30 years. And its implication is best described by Donald Hoffman in this video right here.
Think about this 3D cube that you're seeing right there. How much information could you jam into the volume of that cube? Actually, there's no volume, right? You can't stick information into the volume, right? Right. So you're seeing a 3D cube here with a volume, but there's no way that you could actually stick information into the volume. Clean prediction of what I just said. You cannot, in the space around us, stick information into volumes. Clean prediction of what I just said. Now that might seem, aha, that's clearly false, but it's not. So how much information could you actually stick inside, say, the volume of that volleyball? Well, you might say I could stick a terabyte hard drive in there, then maybe another terabyte hard drive, and then I could maybe make them smaller. I could keep sticking information into the volume of that. What's the maximum amount of information in the ultimate that you could stick inside that volume? Well, it turns out we have an answer. Stephen Hawking answered this. And it's independent of the volume. The amount of information you can stick inside a volume of space does not at all depend on the volume. The volume is utterly irrelevant. You cannot use volume to store information. Only surface area. The amount of information is proportional to the surface area. It's called the holographic principle. It's one of the deepest, most profound discoveries in physics in the last 30 years. What this means is the following. Suppose I have a big sphere with a certain volume. I can stick as much information in it as proportional to the surface area of that sphere. But now imagine that I take 6 smaller spheres of equal size that just fit inside. I've illustrated it there. Now you can see that they have less volume than the whole sphere. In fact, they have roughly half. But they have more surface area. The 6 small spheres have less than half the volume, but they have more surface area than the big sphere. That means you can stick, and this is the universe we live in. This is not science fiction. This is not make-believe. This is not a novel. You can stick more information into those 6 spheres than you can stick into the big one. Now, if that's blowing away everything that you believe about space and time, that's my goal. That is my goal. Now, we can do this recursively. Take each one of these spheres, break it into 6, and keep doing it. Do it 20 times. Do it 30 times. After you've done it that many times, you can store a ton more information, billions of times more information, and the volume is essentially 0. That's the universe we live in. And the reason it's that way is because space is not an objective reality in which we live. It's an error-correcting code, a data structure that we inhabit. You are living in a data structure. It really is like the Matrix.
So moving on to why this principle is important to our success, because, I apologize, that did get a little bit sciencey for my taste, sciencey and philosophical, really, which, I don't mind getting into either sciencey stuff or philosophical stuff, but my purpose here is to make you more successful. And so I always want to connect the importance of this stuff to your success. So in order to do that, we have to look at what it means to say as above, so below, because another way to say as above, so below is to say as within, so without. And what this principle also states is that you're not existing in the universe, but that you are the universe. And the only reason why you don't feel like the entire universe is because of your individualistic perspective, which creates your ego. And this ego is created by that perspective. And that perspective, I just want to point out, is an illusion that allows you to experience a life or grow in consciousness, because a universally, wholly complete perspective would be just entirely too overwhelming to comprehend or understand. And the point for me bringing this up is because due to our perspective, we have a tendency to disconnect our inner world, what's going on inside of our mind, from the outer world, stuff that's occurring outside of our mind. And the whole point here is that your mind, your inner world, and the outer world, all that stuff out there, those things are one. They're not one and the same. They are one. There's no separation between these two things. It just appears that there is a separation between these two things because of our perspective. But they're intrinsically connected, and we only separate them really because it's very difficult to use English, to use any language and talk about those two things without separating them with terms and definitions. And so by this rationality, the study of the inner workings of ourselves, the inner workings of ourselves being our thoughts and emotions, can help lead us to an understanding of what is appearing outside, or what is occurring outside of ourselves, which also includes our behaviors and our actions in the real world, because they're mirror reflections of one another. Your behavior is a reflection of your thoughts and your emotions, and this is reiterating the first principle, the principle of mentalism. This is why we go inside of ourselves to understand things that supposedly are existing outside of ourselves. So moving on to the principle of vibration. The principle of vibration states that nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. At the most fundamental level, the universe and everything that comprises it is pure vibratory energy, manifesting itself in different ways. The universe, as such, has no solidity, as matter is merely energy in a state of vibration or oscillation. And so there's no such thing as non-motion or death. In other words, you cannot go anywhere in the universe where something is at complete rest. It just appears solid to us from our perspective when we experience the thing through our limited senses. And as such, what we think is physical matter has no true solidity. This principle reinforces the idea that what we're experiencing is not a material world. The teachings of the East have known this for thousands of years. This is what they call the Maya, or the illusion. The illusion is the physical world and includes the illusion of all physical matter, and this includes the illusion of our physical bodies. Okay? And so moving on to the principle of polarity. The principle of polarity states that everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All paradoxes may be reconciled at some level. This is the metaphysical idea that is known as coincidentia oppositorum, or unity of opposites. All things have a pair of opposites that constitute one thing in its totality. And knowing this will help you understand opposing forces and how they're actually one and the same. So, knowledge of this principle helps us to not lose sight of the bigger picture. And so it allows us to better protect ourselves from falling towards one extreme or the other extreme, because all extremes lead to ruin. And so an example of this coincidentia oppositorum, this unity of opposites, is the obvious two opposing forces of the Democrat Party and the Republican Party in US politics. While these two parties look like two completely different things that are in complete odds with one another, more so than usual, they're actually just one thing. At the end of the day, both of these parties essentially constitute the entire United States government, which is one singular thing. For now, anyways. And so, this is actually why we go to the polls when we vote, because you're voting on a polarity. And this principle also is what creates the Earth's magnetic field. And this is why we call the North Pole and the South Pole poles, because they're at polarity with each other. And this is just a positive and a negative force. And it's polarity, polar opposites. Polar thinking allows us to reconcile with opposing forces because mutually exclusive opposites need each other. They need each other, else there's no contrast for the one thing standing on its own. We got to look at this idea of these two polarities, these two extremes. We are aware that being at the extreme end of whatever is not a good thing. And so the best place to be is in balance between the two seemingly opposing forces, to be in balance, to be in between. This is known as the Tao, or the Way, or the Word made flesh, or the idea of non-duality, existence and non-existence, both existing and not existing at the same time. So, polarity, I'm going to pull up an image of the yin-yang symbol, because polarity is symbolized by the yin-yang symbol very nicely. The yin is the black and the yang is the white. They are two seemingly opposing forces that are represented as one symbol. They cannot exist without one another because the one creates the other, and their dance around each other creates the way, or the middle ground between these two forces. The middle ground is what makes the S shape that's created from the opposition of these two opposing forces. This is where you want to be, in the crevice, a balance. And the balance is because you're being pulled equally from either direction. And we actually see this balance and this unity and this beauty in our planet, because you have the two poles that we already talked about, and those areas are inhospitable, relatively anyway. And whereas if you go to the equator, the area between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, the middle of the Earth is actually home to more life than anywhere else on the planet. You compare that to the North and the South Poles, it's like night and day. And also, just note that there's many shades of gray that's between the extreme of pure whiteness and the void of pure blackness. Each degree up or down is like the rung of a ladder. Each step into one side or the other gets you closer to an extreme and further away from balance. And as you chase one extreme, you actually get closer to the very extreme that you're trying to run away from. Because, as you can see from the symbol, it's the black dot of the yin that creates the yang, and it's the white dot of the yang that creates the yin. They're one in the same. Opposites attract because opposites are one in the same. So, examples of coincidentia oppositorum include existence and non-existence, truth and lies or truth and illusoriness, love and fear, yin and yang, cause and effect, problem and solution, masculine and feminine energies, positive and negative energies, good and evil. And those are just a few examples. Next is the principle of rhythm. The principle of rhythm states that everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. So, positive and negative energies expressed by the principle of polarity are not fixed, and the principle of rhythm acknowledges this flow. So that's why, in between the yin and the yang, it's an S shape and not a straight line. It's because these two things are dancing, and the dance creates a rhythm. The energy of the universe is constantly creating ebbs and flows, and it's doing this at all scales. And they swing equally from the positive to the negative, and these energies have a visible effect on conscious beings. The rhythm affects us, it definitely affects us, but you can still do whatever you want to do or choose to do whatever you want to do. But you have to acknowledge that you're going to have to exert more energy in certain moments compared to other moments if you're not patient. And we can look at the very simple example of the constant ebbing and flowing of the tides of the ocean as well, because if the tide's coming in, you have to exert more energy, you have to paddle harder and in order to kayak out into an ocean when the tide's coming in. And then on the flip side, when you're going to shore as the tide's coming in, you actually exert less energy because the tide's going in with you. You're flowing with the tide. And then likewise, if the tide's going out, you're going to have an easy time going into the ocean and then have a hard time coming back home when you're ready to come home. And the whole point of this is to just bear in mind that these ebbs and flows, just bear in mind of these ebbs and flows, because it's not about choosing the lesser of two evils when you have the knowledge of the flow, of the rhythm. You can find the middle way. And that's one way to look at this. And you could simply just paddle out in between the tides and then paddle in between the tides. That's kind of going with that's kind of finding the middle way. But then you can go deeper than that and actually utilize these principles and realize that you can have your cake and eat it too in our reality. You can have your cake and eat it too. Because if you're patient and you wait for the right moment, you can go out as the tide is going out, and then when you're out there, just wait for the tide to come in and utilize the tide going in. And you can do this in just countless examples. But the point is that once you know what the flow is and you pay attention and you care about it, it just makes life a whole lot easier when you're patient. And then obviously, we don't want to go too extreme because the principle of polarity states that extremes are not a great place to be in. So if you're going too much with the flow, sometimes that means that you're missing opportunities because they're not absolutely perfect. And all that this means is that sometimes you have to act even when the moment isn't perfect. And it's all about balance. And that also includes perceptually good things like going with the flow. Sometimes if you're forced to, you have to ignore the flow and do something where you know that you're going to have to exert more energy because the moment or the opportunity is right there for you. And so last thing on rhythm, and then we'll move on to cause and effect. This principle, or this the pendulum swing of the flow, it exists in all things, and this includes success and failure. Our success goes up, and then something occurs, we lose the great business thing that we had. A new law comes into effect that just completely destroys our business. I had that feeling with my Airbnbs. The point is that when success comes, it's great and all that stuff is wonderful. But as conscious beings who know the principle of rhythm, we understand this pendulum swing, we have to remind ourselves that success is going to come with an equal swing to the negative. And what we can actually do is plan for this swing back. And all that this means is when success is working for you and you're making money and you're doing great, that's awesome. But don't pretend like that's just your life now. Prepare for what is expected to come. Prepare for the worst. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. That just means save your money. Don't buy things that you don't need. And get ready for the swing back. And what that actually does, since you're consciously aware of it and you're paying attention to it, is it's actually going to lessen the swing to the negative. You're consciously effecting that swing, and so you're bringing that swing back down consciously and slowing it, trying to get it into balance, and then maybe hopefully swing back up into the success mode more quickly, more consciously, as you continually prepare for the worst. So that just the whole point of that is to just show that conscious effort can slow the pendulum swing down as it heads into the negative, or you can find the middle ground between the ebb and flow, and then go with the flow as it's going with you and it's working. But then when it stops working for you, just be ready and be prepared for it. So moving on, the principle of cause and effect. The principle of cause and effect states that every cause has its effect, and every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Chance is but a name for law not recognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law. So, effects are driven by causes that come first and manifest conditions, rules, that create its effect. Causes and their effects are pairs of opposites. You cannot have a cause without its supporting effect, and you cannot have an effect without its creating cause. And so, I got a ball here. I cannot create the cause of throwing the ball without having the effect of the ball going to where I threw it. Does this effect occur immediately? Absolutely not. There is what is known as a time lag. You set the cause into motion, and over time and with concentration of energy, the cause will always manifest its effect. So once I release the ball out of my hand, it will create the effect of going to where I threw it. And the more I concentrate my energy into throwing the ball and making a good motion and throwing the ball as hard as I can, perhaps, the sooner the ball will get to where it was going. And so in my example, you actually get to witness the time lag as expressed as when the ball is in the air after the point in which I threw the ball, and before the ball lands. So my arm motion, and then the ball being in the air, and then before it lands. You see that time lag. But I point this out because for the most part, when you're doing cause and effect for financial success and stuff like that, which is really just goal setting and stuff like that, you're not perceptually aware of the time lag between cause and effect, because it can take a really long time for certain causes to manifest their effects, time and energy. And so sales is a good example of this, because one of the things that salespeople do is called cold calling. And cold calling is one of the most horrible things that you can do on the face of the earth. It is not enjoyable because 9,999 times out of 10,000, the person that you call doesn't want you to be calling them because it's a cold call. You're calling them without any knowledge of whether they're interested in your product or not. And most people don't like being annoyed like that. But salespeople do cold calls because it works. It creates the effect of getting sales. Even when a salesperson has nothing. Even when a salesperson has no leads and no potential clients. And any successful salesperson will tell you, it doesn't happen overnight. But those who have faith in the process, that those cold calls will create the effect of getting leads, they'll regularly get leads from cold calling. Will those leads manifest into sales? Not necessarily, because it just goes into the sales funnel. But if you follow up on your leads, and over time and with concentration of energy, in this case, concentration of energy being your ability to close a sale, over time, any person will get sales from cold calling. And just so you know, the average number of calls before a close is around 10,000 cold calls. 10,000 calls. That's the average. And so it means that if you're lucky, you can get a sale in like just 100 calls, which would be great. But then also if you're unlucky, it could be 100,000 calls. But that's not the point. The point is that the cold calling will create the effect of getting a sale. But, it'll create the effect of getting the sale as long as you never stop calling. As long as you never stop doing the thing that, doing the cause that creates the effect. If you stop calling after 10 calls and you say, cold calling doesn't give me any sales, well, that's not fair. That's not fair, okay? Because it's the process, okay? It's not every cold call will give you the sale, will give you the effect of the sale. It's doing it over and over again, time and concentration of energy. All right, so moving on to something else that I need to explain about cause and effect. Causes only occur within the mind on what we're calling the mental plane. And effects only occur in the physical world, what we call the plane of effects. So for my ball throwing example, I decide in my mind that I'm going to throw the ball. Okay? And the decision is made in my mind, in the mental plane. That's when the ball is set into motion. Not when I start throwing. when I start throwing, the cause is already set into motion, and the only thing that can stop it is another cause that occurs in my mind, which must occur before the ball leaves my hand. And in which case, that cause, that's just a cause that sets into motion the effect of stopping me from releasing the ball out of my hand. And that doesn't change the original cause and effect. That cause was already set in motion in my mind. It just changed the effect slightly, the effect being where the ball is going to go. And this is where kind of language breaks down, because it sounds like if I don't release the ball, then that means that you didn't throw the ball. And that's not necessarily true. It just means that where I threw the ball was in my hand. And that's an issue in language, not physics. So usually, and the part of the reason why I wanted to bring this up is that this is important for your success, because this change in decision between the true decision of deciding to throw the ball and then changing that decision just milliseconds, milliseconds before the ball leaves my hand, actually creates something called confusion. Confusion just is two words, con, which is the prefix, which means with, and then fusion just means joining together. And it's confusion here because what we're attempting to fuse together is two causes at the same time. And that cannot occur. You cannot have two causes fusing together. So what that does is that you sort of kind of what is known as break natural law. And what that means is that usually bad things occur after you break natural law. And in this case, what it does is it'll probably cause me to not throw the ball properly. I'll probably not have enough time to make the decision to stop throwing the ball. And so the throw will get all messed up and will be released improperly, unconfidently, or in an unsure manner. And all that means is that you end up kind of destroying the mechanics or the motion of your throwing ability because it lacks confidence. Or, in other words, once you make a decision, the worst thing that you can do to yourself is second guess your decision while you still have physical control over the situation. Always follow through and trust that you made the right decision and allow the motion to execute with confidence. And this isn't just about throwing balls. This is about any decision that you make in your life. Once the decision is made, execute. Okay, it's all about execution and trusting that the execution will be proper and correct. And as the saying goes, once the ball is out of your hands, you now have zero power to affect change of where that ball is going to go. And that's where we're going to move on to that topic, as it's fairly interesting. And so let's talk about these two planes a bit more. The plane of effects is the physical world. It's the world that you perceive with your senses. This is where manifested realities have formed due to their underlying causes. The plane of effects constitutes that which has already occurred. That which has already occurred cannot change. Okay, so no power to affect change lies in the plane of effects, because that which has already occurred cannot unoccur. It has become that which is, or what we've called the truth. So you have to free yourself from focusing your time on the plane of effects, because the effects in our lives have already been set into motion by their causes by the time they reach the physical world, and certainly by the time we start to analyze them. And so your current state of affairs, your finances, your life, your living situation, those things already exist. They are that which is. They exist as effects of prior causes from the mental plane that have already occurred before you understanding the idea, the general principle of cause and effect. And so if the effect shows you something that you don't want to see, if the effect is something that you don't want, well, it's already occurred and cannot be changed. And so focusing on the effect only really leads to self-inflicted suffering, because the moment you determine that you don't like the effect, the stuff that you're seeing in your life, well, look at those things and analyze them very briefly to acknowledge that you don't like them. But then we have to start focusing on the things that caused the effect in your life, that caused the effects that you don't like. And so you need to focus on the causal factors that led to the current conditions that have already been set into motion. You need to know the why behind the effects that you're experiencing. Why do you live where you live? Why do you have so much debt? Why are you not in the relationship that you want to be in? So We find out the why by focusing on the plane of causality, which is the mental plane. This is your mind. Going back to the first principle, the mind is all. This is where causes are set into motion prior to manifesting as formed realities. Remember, everything that happens has to come from the mental state that preceded it. This means that all power to effect change in your life exists in the mental plane only. How I chose to throw the ball, whether hard or soft, far or short, is the major factor in determining whether the effect of where the ball is going to go and how quickly it's going to get there. This is where your focus must be, because only the mental plane can free you from your current state of affairs or the already occurred unwanted effects in your life. So, once you know the root causal factors of the effects in your life, you can then start to eliminate those root causal factors and start to create new causal factors that have been proven to create the effects that you actually want in your life, like more money, a better relationship, or a better place to live, or whatever. So in summary, the plane of causality, the mental world, is where all power to effect change lies. Thus, this is where our focus must be concentrated, and concentrated it will be, because we're going to be talking about that a whole lot. I'm not going to really worry about what's existing in the plane of effects, because I want to change the plane of effects, so it doesn't really matter. I need to know the root causal factors. We're going to talk about that a whole lot. All right, next, the principle of gender, or the principle of creation. The principle of gender states that gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests itself on all planes, both mental and physical. The way I'm using the term gender here is actually in association with the word generative, which is derived from the Latin verb generare, which means to create. It has to do with generation, genesis, or creation. And that's really the real meaning of gender, ultimately, but to engender, to create, to produce. And we have to remind ourselves that we are producers, not consumers, okay? And it associates itself biologically to creating life because, you look at any species of animal, and for the most part, you need a man or a male and a female to make a baby. And interestingly, we actually see this tendency in nearly all forms of life. And creation itself, just any form of creation, not just making babies, experiences both of these tendencies as well. You need both of these tendencies to create anything. And so we're going to talk about what I mean by that in, right now. I just wanted to point out that, if this masculine and feminine stuff weirds you out or anything, just call it positive or negative. These are just terms that have been used long before political correctness was a thing. But I like the terms masculine and feminine because they mean something to me. But again, they're just terms that just point out these two tendencies in creation. And so we have to talk about creation because creation's kind of our thing. First of all, for success, you have to create something. You have to produce something to be successful. I'm producing videos right now, okay? You have to produce in order to be successful. But the wonderful thing about humans is that creating things is kind of our thing. Like, that's what differentiates us from most animals. You can give me some ideas of some animals that create things, like beavers make dams, bees make hives, birds make nests. But humans, we kind of create whatever we want. And that's pretty fascinating and makes us very different from any other species on Earth. And so we have to know what this stuff is, because these creations, like I said, these creations that we make have value. They have value for us because when we create things, we're actually being more human than a human. Sorry. Because what's occurring is we're doing the one thing that actually makes us happy. Creating, doing things, using your hands to make something. And these things, these creations have value because, the principle of polarity, we are producers, and if we're producers, then we're also consumers. And so you can find somebody who finds your creations to have value for them as well, and you can sell it or exchange it to them for whatever you need. And so that's a big deal to understand this idea of creation. And at the foundational level, how we create can be defined as this interesting dance between what we're calling the masculine and what we're calling the feminine, the yin and the yang. And the idea, the thought, and the emotion, the drive to birth your creation in the real world. So because in order for anything to be created, you need the unification of these two forces, of these two tendencies. And we see this in nature with males and females of most species. They create life through sexual union. So that's what we're going to use as a representation of what I'm talking about here, because we have the masculine aspect, which initiates a creation, and the feminine aspect actually produces it. And so if you think of this as creation of a human baby, we have a human fertilization of the union. That's just the union of a woman's egg and a man's sperm. Once the initiating expression is engendered, conception occurs and new DNA is created. New life is formed. And then it's then that the woman who grows the life. It's the woman who carries the life. It's the woman who gives nearly everything she's got simply to give birth to this new life. And then, amazingly, it's the woman who sustains the life with nothing more than her body through her breast milk. And that's incredible, okay? That is an incredible thing. And so we look at that and we're like, that's amazing. So then you look at that in relation to what the man does. And in relation to the woman's contribution to childbirth, the only thing that the man does is the only thing that he thinks about doing all the time, every second of every day, which is sex. And so it's pretty funny when you stop and you look at it, but it's just pointing out that that these two things are necessary for each other, and also that these two tendencies are quite different. And the point is that one's not better than the other. A goal is going to be needed. Always, you're going to need a goal, an idea, and you're going to need a one-dimensional drive towards that goal in order to create the idea of that goal. And then, this can be seen also as your libido, if we're talking about sex, because this libido is one of the most powerful energetic forces in existence, and we'll talk about sex drive in later videos. The point here is to talk about the goal, and for sex, the goal is survival and replication. And so you have this one-dimensional sex drive for survival and replication, and then you have the feminine tendency to pretty much do everything else in that process through childbirth. And again, this is just a representation of what's occurring on the mental plane, within the individual, within the singular individual, when they create something. Because a man's one-dimensional sex drive is the physical representation of the initiating expression, or the goal, or the idea that feels like it needs to be fulfilled. And the woman is the physical representation of the feeling like it needs to be fulfilled. And this is occurring within all of us. And within all of us when we do things, when we create something. So on the mental plane, we have to move beyond this simple idea that a man is just masculine and a woman is just feminine, because polarity exists in all beings, okay? A man, an individual, is one thing, and what that means is that we have poles. So we both have, this pole actually emanates from our heart, and it creates a magnetic field, just like how the Earth has a magnetic field. Obviously, ours is much weaker, but the point is that this means that each and every human has a masculine and feminine tendencies, and they're expressed on the mental plane as thought and emotion. And so this is where creation starts. In order for you to create anything, you need an idea, a thought that you want to create. The idea is your masculine energy, and it inseminates that idea into the feminine, and your feelings and emotions, where your feminine energy is actually growing and carrying it, and then ultimately giving nearly everything you got in order to create it in the physical world. And then it's that very drive and your love of the thing that you created that actually protects and sustains that creation until either mass production or just defending your art and your image or whatever you've created in the real world. Because critics exist and they're real and they're hurtful. And so, your feminine energy, of which we all have, is your limitless creative potential. It's your emotion, your passion, your intention, your motivation, and your drive to create. Emotion has everything to do with motivation, everything to do with emotion. Motivation is all about taking action, getting in motion. And then the masculine, of which we all have, directs your natural limitless creative potential towards a goal, towards an idea. And just because you're a man doesn't mean that your mental plane is all about being masculine and then you just have a little bit of feminine. And then likewise, if you're a woman, it doesn't mean that you're mostly feminine on the mental plane and then just a little bit masculine. That's not really how it works, okay? The mental plane is a completely different animal when it comes to masculine and feminine stuff. And so, the point is that union must be met because your feminine needs direction, because limitless potentiality means limitless potentiality. But we're not limitless beings, okay? We only have a little bit of time here on Earth, about 80 years. And so we need to quickly determine what we should focus our limitless energy on. And further, our masculine energy needs the feminine limitless potentiality because it doesn't have access to this limitless creative ability. And so each side needs each other. They need to be working together. They need to form a union within your mind. And this creates internal sovereignty, which we'll talk about a lot in later videos. So they must work together in order to get pen to paper, in order to write a story, in order to get paintbrush to canvas, in order to get anything that's going on in here out into the real world, okay? And because we're going to be and it does this really because of the feminine energy, the drive, the motivation. It'll do this by any means necessary if the idea is good enough, if you feel like the idea is worthy of creation itself. And so we're going to be talking about this a lot, but I probably won't be using these terms masculine or feminine because it's the union between our thoughts, which is the masculine, and the emotions, which is the feminine, that determines our actions or behavior in the real world. And it's our actions themselves that determine who we are as conscious beings. Nobody knows how you feel. Nobody knows what you're thinking about. So nobody cares about that stuff. All that we care about is your action in the real world, because that's all that we can see and that's all that we can record. And so these three things, thought, emotion, and action, these are the three aspects of consciousness. It's all about creating. That's all that consciousness is about, creating things, okay? And we'll be talking about it, so don't worry if this doesn't make sense quite yet. So finally, the principle of care. The final principle is the principle of care, or the principle of meaning, which is the binding force that holds all of the other principles together. This makes it the encapsulating principle. This is the thing that has to be present in order for any change to manifest itself in your life. What we care about, okay, what we care about on a day-to-day basis acts as the driving force of our thoughts, emotions, and actions, the driving force of our consciousness, of human consciousness. And therefore, care can be seen as the ultimate generator of the quality of our experience here on Earth. So I want to be clear about care and point out that care is not love. Care is not compassion. We're going to talk about love in a couple of videos, but care is not love, okay? Care is not compassion. Care is meaning and purpose. What is meaningful to you? What is your purpose in life? Okay? Answer the following questions and you will know what you care about. What are you spending your time on? What are you paying attention to? What are you focusing on? What are you doing on a day-to-day basis? This is why journaling is so important, because humans have the worst memories of all time, okay? We have terrible memories, all right? So if we want to know what we're doing on a day-to-day basis, we journal, and then we analyze that, and if that stuff are things that we don't like, well, it's what you care about because it's what you're doing, okay? And so the answers to these questions are the things that you're knowingly or unknowingly creating in your life. They are your meaning. They are what you care about, whether you know it or not. And so you can claim to not care about something, but if you're spending 40 hours a week on it, then you care about it, because that's a whole chunk of time. That's a whole work week. So what you do on a daily basis, whether you like it or not, whether you like what you're doing or not, is what you find meaningful and is what you care about. And if they weren't, then you wouldn't be doing them. So if your day-to-day actions aren't creating the life that you want to live, then simply change the answers to the questions to whatever will create the life that you want to live, and then start living that life on a daily basis. In other words, change what you focus on. Energy flows where concentration goes. Concentrate. Focus on new things to change your reality. So, those are the 8 general principles of natural law. What we went over are just the rules that help us better understand our universe. Note, really, that it's about as if I just read to you the rule book to the game of chess, okay? Meaning, I don't want you to think that now that you have this information, you're a chess master. by no means will just knowing the rules to chess make you a chess master. It just means that you know how a pawn moves, which is a good place to start. And so, the point of me saying that is that there's still a lot more to learn, and over the following months and years, I will be providing more and more context and content and understanding in regard to the first principles in order to show you how these principles for success, how to use these principles for success in whatever success means to you. And further, I fully understand that these principles, they're weird, okay? I understand that these principles are weird. Like, what does this have to do with success? What does this mean? What does this have to do with being successful? Well, all that I can do is assure you right now that there's a method to my madness, and that this stuff really opened a whole lot of doors to a whole lot of ideas of what success was, and I became less needy towards needing other people to help me with certain things once I understood and had knowledge of these general principles. And really the point is that we have to start somewhere, and I just don't feel like it's fair to tell you about success but not tell you about the general principles that basically determine our universe, determine our behavior here on Earth. And so we started at the very beginning. Why not, And remember, ultimately, this is the last point, and I'm going to reiterate from what I started at the beginning, is that I've broken these general principles down to their constituent parts. But and we did this in order to better understand the nature of the universe in its pieces. But in order to understand these principles, we have to understand them in their totality as they're working together. And so understand that they're all working together at once and at all times. Each one exists and flows with each other one. They cannot be separated. And because of this, they bear many similarities between each other. And that's by design. And going back to one of my favorite quotes of all time, Miyamoto Musashi, "If you know the way broadly, you will see it in everything." And this includes the principles themselves. And because we can see that the principle of mentalism creates the boundary line of our consciousness. It's all things because we cannot experience a thing without it. And that's what makes the mind all. So that's like the encapsulating part of the egg. And what we have then is consciousness existing outside of our three-dimensional perceptions. And when we look outside of our senses and we accept the limitations of our perspectives and our senses, we see the fractal nature of our reality. And everywhere we look in our universe, we see self-similar processes that build upon one another into ever-changing complexities. We see this with words, because words are made from letters, and then letters create words, and then words create phrases, and then phrases create sentences. And you see this in all things. You can see this with atoms as well. Atoms form together, bond, create molecules. Molecules create proteins. Proteins create cells. Cells create us. You see this in everything. And it just allows you to see this fractal nature from this perspective of the human understanding. And so what we choose to perceive from these limited senses, from our limited perspective, creates this illusion of solidity. Because everything that I just told you about words and atoms and all that stuff, that creates an illusion of solidity. And it does this out of nothing. It does this where no solidity actually exists. And when we look past this illusion, we see two opposing forces locked together in a eternal rhythmic dance with one another. And you can call these two forces yin and yang. You can call it cause and effect. You can call it masculine and feminine. It doesn't matter what you call them. There is these two forces there, and they're dancing. And it's all the same thing. And it's this dance between these two forces that creates all of the meaning and all of the value that we choose to perceive, we choose to understand. And it's a creation mechanism, and it's beautiful. And as conscious beings existing in such a reality, we can tap into these forces to create anything, because all of this is about creation. And we do this by creating anything that we want out of literally nothing, because we are these forces as well. We were created out of nothing as well. And so understand the intimate connection that we all have to these principles. You already know these principles because they are you. They create you. And you will always represent them because our existence, our universe, us, we depend upon them. And so now Since you know them, since they're known to you, you can use them to create the life that you want to live and gain success, and gain the success that you want for yourself, your family, and for your society from these generalities. And in later videos, we're going to talk about more specific stuff about this stuff. And I understand that this was a long video, and I apologize about that, but I wanted to get all this stuff out in one video just so it's in one location. And then from here, we're going to move on to how our reality is built, which I've introduced to you many times: data structures, processing information. But let's really talk about what that means in the next video. So I'll see you there.